Quicker than you could pop a bag of popcorn, the fight is over. Conor McGregor landing shoulder shots on the bridge of the nose of Donald Cerrone, ending the fight in 40 seconds flat at UFC 246. McGregor notching his first win in the UFC in more than 3 calendar years. We're going to have that highlight for you in just a bit. But first, some immediate reaction from UFC Hall of Famer and former champion Rashad Evans. Rashad, we just saw some amazing action there. Conor throughout the week was toting a feel-it-out process. There was no feeling out. He stepped to the middle of the ring, he delivered, and in so much time it was over. What are your immediate reactions coming out of this one?
Totally unbelievable, man. I knew Conor had power, but that was just something different. I mean, it's one thing to have power at 155, but it's another thing to move up one weight class and then be underweight on fight night, because you got to remember, Conor probably stepped into the cage about 168 tonight. We're down probably at 185. So to be able to go out there and just let that kind of power go right out the gate with a big, powerful left hand and then a big kick, I mean, he just returned back to legacy status again,
Honestly, he does every time he steps into that octagon, or more times than not, we see him do something amazing, something we've never seen before. Tonight, it's the shoulder strikes. 14 first-round finishes. You speak to his recognition of the moment. Just how much was that recognition a process of what we saw tonight?
Well, there's nobody better, in my opinion, who seizes the moment better than Conor McGregor. I mean, he's cool as ice when it comes down to it, and it's got to be something that he does mentally speaking, putting himself there over and over again with visualization. But whatever the case may be, when he gets his mind and he's in that opportunity, he seizes the moment and he doesn't falter. And that is a very hard quality, because there's so many different things that can pull your distraction away.
In the fight game, we hear the question over and over, how hungry can a rich man truly be? I think we got an answer to that tonight. Just how hungry do you believe Conor is moving forward, as he does now set himself up in emphatic fashion for another shot at the title?
I think he's very hungry, and you know what? I think that, he settled into the whole money idea, so now he's fighting for something different. And for him, he's fighting for respect and he's fighting for pride, because he feels that even though that he has accomplished all these great things, he still feels slighted, and he still has a chip on his shoulder. And a fighter with a chip on his shoulder can fight forever. It doesn't matter how much money they have in the bank. He can be rich as whatever the case may be, but if he has that chip on his shoulder and he feels like he's been done wrong, then he's going to fight from that perspective.
Conor McGregor just moments ago saying he's ready to take on anyone, and it seemed like everyone was in the building tonight except Khabib Nurmagomedov. Usman was in the building. Masvidal was in the building. Conor says he's ready to take on anyone. He just fought at 170. Do you see him going back to 155 for that belt, or possibly talking to Dana White about a title in the 170 division?
Yeah, I think he's going to probably do something in the 170 division. I don't think he's going to go for the belt, but I think he's going to go for that BMF belt, because now that matchup looks good. Now that matchup with Masvidal and Conor looks good, because Conor just showed there that he has the power and he's hitting different. He talked about before this fight how he went back to his old boxing coaches, the guys who got him into boxing and fighting in the first place, and they told him to sit down with his punches. And you've seen the results of that tonight. So if he's in there hitting like that, then he can definitely stand in there with a guy like Masvidal.
We talked about it yesterday, Rashad, about how it's different to hear Conor McGregor speak the way he did leading up to this fight. And you were worried about it a little bit, kind of leaning on that friendship with Cowboy Cerrone. Before, during, and after this fight, that was sort of the narrative. But in those 40 seconds during the fight, he got the job done. Do you think that this is a different Conor McGregor, a guy who could move forward, I guess, with friendship first?
I did. You know what it was? I got kind of caught up in the whole Tony Robbins thing, because you know what happened with Tony Robbins and the whole shallow Hal thing, right? Shallow Hal wanted the shallow gal. It was the reverse, right? It could switch up his mentality. So I was thinking maybe the same thing happened with Conor McGregor. Mm-hmm. But you know what? I think also, when you go through the kind of things that Conor goes through, it matures you and it makes you approach life differently. And I think that's what we're seeing, the maturation of Conor McGregor.
It definitely appears that this is a different fighter, just as explosive, just as entertaining. We do have to talk about Cowboy Cerrone and what this means for his future in the UFC. Obviously, he's made that walk to the octagon more times than anyone in UFC history. A great champion in his own right, never raised a belt. Doesn't appear that he'll get the opportunity after this sort of loss. Do you see this possibly being the last time we see Cowboy walk to the octagon?
I wouldn't say the last time. I think he'll probably do a few more fights, but I think we're probably seeing the last few fights of Cowboy. You know, this is probably a good send-off as far as a payday kind of thing, and kind of something he can ride off in the sunset with. You know, he had that big fight. He didn't have a title fight, but he had that big fight, the one that everybody was talking about, the one that everybody wanted to be with, and the one that you dream about as being a fighter. You know, you want to have that big moment, and he had that moment tonight. I don't think he'll get another one, but he had it tonight.
UFC Hall of Famer Rashad Evans giving us his instant reaction to UFC 246. Conor McGregor taking care of Cowboy Cerrone in 40 seconds. Rashad, we appreciate the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We got plenty more coming from UFC 246 here on CBS Sports HQ. Highlights coming up and reaction from a whirlwind of a fight. 40 seconds, Conor McGregor in a TKO over Donald Cowboy Cerrone. We got your highlights from the main event, UFC 246, and the stars were out. Christian McCaffrey, Myles Garrett, Baker Mayfield in a funky hat. Tom Brady looking great as ever, usually playing on this weekend. Donald Cowboy Cerrone making his 34th career walk to the octagon, most wins in UFC history. Gonna have to go through the notorious Conor McGregor, fighting under MMA rules just for the second time since 2016. Right off the bat, Conor comes out firing, lands a shoulder strikes to the nose of Cowboy Cerrone, appear to have broken the nose, then lands a kick. Conor lands it right on Cerrone's cheek, and then it went to the ground. Cerrone would cover up. This one goes 40 seconds in favor of the notorious Conor McGregor. Victory by TKO. Money Mac back in the winner's circle. It is his 14th first-round finish. The guy knows how to come out and swing. Fireworks. Jose Aldo. Add it to the list. Donald Cerrone finished in 40 seconds. As we know, he's the first simultaneous multi-division champion in UFC history. Now, does he eye the 170 belt or the 155 belt? He will get his pick of the lot. Fastest title victory in UFC history. That was the 13-second victory over Aldo. This one went just a shade longer at 40 seconds. He's the first Irish-born UFC champion. Will look to again become champion following a finish of Donald Cowboy Cerrone. As always, you can hit the State of Combat podcast for the best in boxing, wrestling, and MMA. Brian Campbell, CBS Sports combat analyst, has the best in the game alongside. You know he's going to have plenty coming out of UFC 246, including a star-studded night that finishes in fireworks off the shoulder of Conor McGregor. We'll have BC coming on the other side. Notorious indeed. Conor McGregor once again victorious in the UFC as the main event of UFC 246, finishing Donald Cowboy Cerrone in 40 seconds flat. Joining us now, CBS Sports combat analyst Brian Campbell, host of the State of Combat pod. BC, take me inside the room, the build-up, the tense moments, and then much like these McGregor fights have in the past, over in the blink of an eye.
Look, you know, anytime Conor McGregor rejoins the scene, the intensity levels are going to raise up, and you can call this Extreme Makeover Notorious Edition. That's how you revive the pay-per-view brand of the biggest star the sport has ever seen. Just 40 seconds it took him to head kick and finish one of the toughest veterans in UFC history in Donald Cowboy Cerrone, and this was an announcement. It felt to a certain degree like the magic was back for the 31-year-old McGregor. Obviously, you can only answer so many questions in a time frame that short of just 40 seconds, but to come back like this with a bang and re-announce himself now as a title contender in two different divisions, as a guy who can get back to what he used to do, which was be active, be in there, build those kind of momentum streaks after having fought just one time in 3 years entering tonight. how could you grade this anything but an A+ for what Conor McGregor was able to do for himself, potentially for the brand of the UFC once again.
Entertaining stuff for fight fans, both religious and fight fans who come just for Conor. It was a night to remember, no doubt, going down in 40 seconds. It seems like this guy always gives us a reason to come back. We saw some shoulder strikes in this one that really broke the nose and bloodied Donald Cerrone. Have you ever seen anything like that? It seems like his movement was back to that fluidity that we saw in 2016.
Yeah, without question. Adding that shoulder strike off the clinch, which bloodied Cerrone's nose, like you mentioned, was a big part in what ended up getting him out of there. It wounded him. McGregor followed up with the kick, knocked him down, finished him with punches on the ground shortly after. And what's interesting about this announcement that he's back is the potential of what he might be able to do at welterweight, which after the fight he said 170 pounds, I feel good, I want this. He mentioned the name of Kamaru Usman, the current champion, who was sitting cage side and sort of welcomed him on with his hand. Obviously, when you're somebody like Conor McGregor, you have so many options, so many directions you can go. But he seems to like this idea of welterweight, a division where some people feared, does he have the punching power to be that big of a menace that he was at featherweight and lightweight? What would happen when his biggest weakness on the ground can get exposed by these bigger wrestlers? Even UFC President Dana White this week had sort of mentioned, I don't really like him against any of these 170-pounders. But when Conor produces finishes like he was able to do tonight, it's going to be hard to keep him out of those discussions.
Yeah, power no longer in question, only a 40-second sample size at 170. So you're the matchmaker now. You got to make the fight. Do you go 170 BMF and give everyone that blockbuster fight against Masvidal? Do you go for the regular belt against Usman, or do you go back down to 55 and go with the historic fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov, another title fight right there?
Well, like I mentioned, you listen to Dana White. He wants that Khabib rematch. What did that fight do in 2018, right? Set a new pay-per-view record for the sport, the only MMA fight to go above the 2 million pay-per-view mark. I think you'd have to believe the odds are more in favor to see that fight again if Khabib can get past Tony Ferguson, of course, in their April bout, the 5th time the promotion tried to book that fight. And obviously, that's no easy out by any stretch of the imagination for Nurmagomedov. Conor will have a say in this, of course. But the kind of business you could potentially do with Conor Khabib 2 at lightweight is obviously through the roof. We'll see which direction it goes. But like I mentioned, there's an excitement when Conor McGregor is back, and it felt real tonight. It was huge. It was demonstrative, and he's going to be able to have his pickings as we move forward.
Regardless of the weight class, those pay-per-view numbers will be there when Conor McGregor is on a card. 3 years, 2 months, and 6 days since his last win. All the questions of ring rust or can a rich man be that hungry, I think were dispelled on a night like tonight. What impressed you most about the performance out of Conor McGregor?
I mean, certainly the explosion and the power, the ability to make that kind of impact and that imprint. Obviously, Conor McGregor's only appearance in the last 3 years is always going to be a tough style matchup when he goes in there against Nurmagomedov. He spent a lot of that fight on the ground with his gas tank getting drained on. But you didn't see that explosion. You didn't see that power on display. To see him back and to see him this week leading up to this fight be jovial, happy, humble. This is a different Conor McGregor who seems happy at this point to be a fighter once again, to do what he did inside that cage against Cowboy Cerrone and not be talked about as much for those negative headlines, many of which he created himself in the past 3 years, and the allegations that still follow him through this fight. Mentally, he seems back, and that's a big thing when you consider at 31 he's still in his physical prime and still has the potential to open up a legitimate second half, a new chapter in his career. Maybe at welterweight, like we mentioned, maybe back at lightweight, we'll see. But you know, every time he gets in there, you're going to want to be front row and center. 19
significant strikes by Conor, 0 by Cowboy in the 42nd bout tonight. I just posed a similar question to Rashad Evans about the future of Conor McGregor and the man we see moving forward. Was this gamesmanship, the respect for Donald Cerrone? Was this something that would hinder him when he walked into the octagon? It didn't seem like that was the case tonight. Do you think that Money Mac returns, or do we see the same humble man pick this next fight and walk to the ring?
You know, it might depend on the matchups to some degree, because as we saw, the build to Conor and Khabib 1 at UFC 229 was as nasty as any we'd ever seen. But I do think overall you're seeing a maturing Conor McGregor, if you will. And if he stays a little bit down this path, and I heard what Rashad echoed multiple times this week from fans, journalists, other fighters saying, if Conor acts like this more often, I like this guy, I can get behind him. It's certainly a public babyface term to steal a pro wrestling term, and whether it's calculated to combat against that negative PR, or whether it's an example of somebody who's been through a lot of ups and downs, a lot of it caused by himself, of course. But in the court of public opinion, they want winners, they like good stories, they like second chances. Today was day one of a new chapter in his career.
Back in the good graces, no doubt. Another man who's always been in the good graces, Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Obviously not the fight that he had imagined or foresaw going up against Conor McGregor. He wanted to get that one under his belt, that notch, that moment that he hasn't had in his career to win the big one. This one ends quickly. What does this mean for the future of Cowboy in the UFC?
You know, he said after the fight inside the cage, he's coming back no matter what. He said that in the build-up this week during the press conferences. He says, give me that 6-fight deal. Get another deal right after that. I'm going to keep fighting at 36 and keep doing what I do, which is stay active, go out there and enjoy myself, which is something he really said he wanted to do tonight. Unfortunately, 3 straight defeats, all 3 against elite competition, all 3 by knockout at 36. It's unfortunate for him that in what he called the biggest fight of his career, that narrative will still follow him of being unable to win the big one. But obviously put his brand on stage here to help opposite Conor McGregor. He's such a beloved fan favorite. His face is on the back of beer cans this week. He's got UFC records for just about everything. You'd think he'd be fine. You think he's going to be back there in a big one against a name you'll know fairly well pretty soon.
You know, when they call, Cowboy picks up the phone. BC, we appreciate the time and the analysis just moments after Conor McGregor's emphatic return to the UFC. As always, you can get the most from BC on the State of Combat podcast, presented by CBS Sports, the best in boxing, wrestling, and